Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Ann Armstrong, Vice President of Strategic Alliances here at GovExec. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's conversation, Zero Trust, Deadlines and Decisions about What to Outsource. Getting a large distributed organization like the federal government on a path to substantial change in its approach to cybersecurity defense is a challenge at best. The latest memo from the Office of Management and Budget, M2209, sets out a detailed federal zero trust architecture strategy with specific objectives and deadlines. It requires agencies to achieve the goals by the end of fiscal year 2024 and describes three themes that underline the approach. The themes are visibility and analytics, automation and orchestration, and governance. Now agencies must find the best way to make real progress with the resources that they have. Here with me today is the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General's Chief Information Officer and Assistant Inspector General for Information Technology, Gerald Karen. So I would love to start the conversation with a little introduction about how you have been involved in your background with cybersecurity and zero trust. Gerald?
Hello, Ann. Good to be here. Thanks for having me. So many years ago, started hearing about one of the big security conferences, started hearing about the concept of this thing called zero trust, and started learning about it, understanding it, and it was very interesting. And I said, yes, this is a good way to do cybersecurity. Made a lot of sense. So I started learning about it myself. And then it started becoming what I would call now a buzzword, so to speak. And there's a lot of various definitions, and my frustrations with hearing those various definitions, of course, I set out to start educating and saying, no, if we want to talk about zero trust, let's make sure we're talking about the right thing and not just pieces of it. So that started many years ago, and now lo and behold, people are starting to catch up. You know, it's in the executive order, it's in the memo that you described now, and it's very much prevalent in the way that people have decided that, yes, this is a better way to do security. Because I like to say that we were doing previously, the peanut butter spread approach, for lack of a better term, trying to spread everything equally and in a large organization. That's kind of hard to do. Also, the castle and moat, or I like to call it the Tootsie Roll Pop approach, hard outer shell, soft gooey center. Everybody inside the castle we trust. Kind of concept. And zero trust is you assume breach. You trust no one until you have some kind of assurance level that, yes, okay, we will allow you to do this. So that leads me to today, where I'm a big advocate, of course, introduce zero trust here in the organization in which I'm responsible for. I also am the co-chair for the CIO's Innovation Council on Zero Trust. And also I am co-chair for ATARC.org's Zero Trust Working Group as well. So doing a lot of work all over around zero trust.
Well, thank you so much for joining us with that background in zero trust. So how would you suggest that an agency start the zero trust journey? I mean, Gartner suggests starting with an identity management system. Do you think that's where agencies should start?
It depends. I think, kind of the first thing, sometimes maybe identity is the place to start. But so there's a couple ways to answer that. First of all, is one of the things I did is, if I did not spend another penny, what could I do today? So I have what I call a zero trust capabilities, functional capabilities model. And we inventoried all of our solutions, whether it was a security solution or not. And we said, all right, here's a capability. Do we have a solution that could do this? Or are we doing it? And if we are doing it, what is our maturity? So using DHS's maturity levels on things. They have a great document on maturity levels to rate where you are. And then we'd rate ourselves. So that's without spending another penny. So we went through all that and all those functional capabilities. And then we knew kind of where we stood, where we needed work, where we were doing well, and where we had gaps. So understanding where you're at and what you can do is a good input going forward. So you might be able to like hit some low hanging fruit and prioritize those things. As far as the pillars, of course, there's 5 pillars as DHS has described them: identity, network, endpoint, applications, and data. And data is very important because at the end of the day, that's what I advocate we are trying to protect. They're all very important. And I don't think you can just do one pillar on its own and then like, all right, I'm done with this pillar, let's go to the next pillar. Because zero trust is an architecture. It's made up of a lot of concepts that all have to integrate. So my fear in doing one pillar, you can start with identity, but if you just concentrate on identity, you got to make sure that it integrates and works together with the other pillars as you modernize zero trust in those pillars as well. Otherwise, the fear is if you go too far down the road, you do that thing called re-engineering, where it's like, oops, this is not going to work with the network pillar, for example. Let me go back and re-engineer things. So what the approach that we're taking is we're looking at each pillar and we're identifying like, all right, what's objective 1 for the identity pillar, for example? All right, this is where we want to be. This is the objective that we want to reach. All right, what are all the projects, tasks, and things that will get us to that objective? And then we're doing the same thing with every pillar. And while we're doing that, we're also looking at the dependencies of those 4 other pillars, if we're like doing identity, and where the integrations need to happen so that we're able to build those in as we go along. So we don't have to do that re-engineering, and we can make sure that everything works together at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you. Of course, you're part of a very large agency. Federal agencies vary enormously in size and scope. What fits for a small independent agency might not work for a large federated agency. Are there common approaches that will work in both situations?
So I'm actually a component of a much larger agency. So I'm small compared to the larger HHS. To answer your question, it is a little different. There's other capabilities that a larger agency than myself may have. Resource wise, there's differences, of course. The technologies that we use may be different, but if you go back and truly understand zero trust, there's 5 principles as outlined when it was invented in Forrester. Those 5 principles are still relevant today. Really understanding those 5 principles, that's what we all have to go back to it. Sometimes, we have to go back to computer 101 and, who talks about the OSI model today? And, it's not talked about much anymore. But every once in a while, it's like you got to go back to basics. So go back to those 5 principles. The concepts are the same. Something like least privilege. The concepts are all the same. What we're doing with zero trust is we're all trying to make it work together. It's not a bunch of stovepipes where, all right, the identity people do their security the way they do. The network people are doing their security the way they do. No, we're trying to bring these all together now to work in conjunction, because what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to not just like say, all right, Anne, you're authenticating with a CAC or a PIV card. Okay, that's good. There's a low level of risk there. I can pretty much assume based on your authentication that you are who you are, but in zero trust, I'm gonna keep monitoring you. If you're logging in with a username and password, there's a higher level of risk than a PIV or a CAT card. So I'm not as sure if you are you, but I'm gonna monitor you. But I'm not only looking at the digital authentication of and constantly checking constant authentication, constant access. I'm also checking the state of the machine. Is it a managed machine? What is the state of that machine? Is it an unmanaged machine like you're doing BYOD? I'm taking in all these different other factors to see and get some assurances and a risk level or a confidence level that you are who you are, and that's going to decide on what I allow you to do. Those concepts are all going to be the same. The principles of zero trust are always going to be the same, but the technologies that I may have, the level of staff I may have, even the resources, the funding and things are going to be a little different. But at the end of the day, we need to also make sure we're accommodating the mission. That's the other thing I was neglected to say. So we got to accommodate the mission, right? We, like HHS OIG is not here put on this earth to do IT. IT is an enabler of the OIG mission. So therefore, I am actually talking to my user base about, zero trust, and like, here's the benefits of zero trust. And there are many benefits that zero trust brings along as a result of, doing zero trust security. But also I'm like, how do you want to work? So how does Anne want to work? Not how does she work? How does she want to work? What's the data that she needs access to? When does she need access to that data? How does she want to access that data? And how, and then I understanding the inventory of the data, because that's what you need to do your job. But I'm also building in the requirements of how, do you want to do it mobily? Do you want to be able to access it from your phone? Things like that. When do you need to access it? When's that important? So I'm building in these requirements, because that makes adoption much easier, as I'm building in the user requirements and trying to accommodate them at the same time as I'm doing better security. So that's some of the ways. So as far as your large versus small, concepts, principles are the same, but where we are and what we have available might look a little different. There's not going to be a one size fits all.
Well, I'm sure that part is true, because the government varies in size of its organizations pretty dramatically. And you touched on this in the conversation we were just having, but what would you say are the biggest challenges that agencies need to address? Obviously, resources and budget are part of them, but what would you say are their biggest challenges?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges. Of course, the airplanes are already in flight in some cases, whereas we're trying to make changes. There's not, we don't have the opportunity necessarily to do green fielding. So how do we do zero trust when the planes are in flight? We're going to be in this hybrid mode. What does that look like? As we're transitioning, that transition is going to be very important, because it's not like I'm going to start zero trust today and tomorrow I'm going to be done. There's going to be a big, long transition. This is a multi-year journey that we're taking. So how are we going to accommodate that transition? What does that look like going forward? Really building in zero trust into the overall architecture, so that those planes that haven't taken off yet, we can capture them and not bolt on security, but build in security as we're going, because we're at the same time we're modernizing. So it's the prioritization of all of that work, those operations, and those planes that are in flight, and trying to get this to apply. There's the concepts. It's not going to be different. It's not going to be an easy task. One of the things I'm doing is understand what normal looks like, because I need to know what normal looks like. For instance, if I'm trying to protect data, where's the data going? Where's the data at? Is it categorized properly? And what is its flows? Not its network flows, but application flows, the data flows. Where is it connecting? Do I understand that? Because I need to know as best what I can what normal looks like, so I can know when something unnormal happens, I can take an action. So baselining is not an easy thing. Sometimes that's difficult, especially when we talk about large, complex, that could be challenging. And then all the concepts, building the technology is there. Integration, I think, is going to be challenging in some cases, because all things don't always integrate together, and this is an integration effort. But one of the things I keep reminding people, it's not just the technology aspect, it's the methodology, understanding the risk tolerances that you have, what is the risk that you're accepting, understanding what those risk thresholds are going to be, because this is not going to be some kind of static where you come to the front door, I let you in. This is going to be a constant check, measuring many factors in as real time as possible, so that I can make quick decisions. I can't wait for a human to see a red blinky light, take an action, figure out what it is. And all that time, malicious things can be going on. So really need to be automated. It really needs to be integrated, and it needs to be real time as possible. But you got to have that methodology. You got to understand your risk tolerances and what those thresholds you want to build, so you can take the appropriate actions when something gets triggered.
Okay. One suggestion that has been made is for agencies to partner or to work with other agencies to share their services or experience. And I know that I just saw that GSA is working on playbooks, which they're apparently going to release out to help. But are there any other established collaboration avenues?
Yeah, so there's a lot. I know IAC talks about this. That's a nonprofit. I chair a working group at atarc.org, which is a nonprofit. It's made up of government and industry. We have the CIO's Innovation Council Zero Trust Working Group as well. The NCCOE has a project in which they're doing a zero trust project, and they have a bunch of vendors where they're doing integrations. So there's definitely many opportunities. I know just here within HHS, we have the CIO and the CISO councils, where it's discussed as well. So there's many opportunities. It's just ask. There's some great things coming out of those opportunities. You discussed the playbook. We have the 800-207, which says this is what zero trust is. The executive order is the push to say we need to be doing this. The memo that you mentioned, 2209, this is what you need to do. And then that last thing I think that people are can benefit from is how to do it, which hopefully the playbook will help with that as well. Because there's some that where to start. There's still discussions on where to start, where to begin, how do we go about doing this, what does this concept really mean in the grand scheme of things. So I really think those are going to help. But there's definitely working groups out there. If you look, I know even I've seen working groups in AFCEA as well. So there's a lot of talent, a lot of brain power, a lot of thought going into this. All you have to do is ask. Vendors are participating in some of these working groups, which is great, because without the vendors, the government needs the vendors to be successful. But at the same time, I challenge the vendors. I ask them, I give them that functional model, the same one I did my inventory with. What do you do? We want to make sure that you understand zero trust so you can properly engage with them. So understanding the principles and the true definition of zero trust helps the government engage with them and have those conversations. But a lot of great work is going on, a lot of great collaboration going on this topic.
Well, that brings up what was my next question, which is how do you go through the planning, but then you have to decide what you can tackle with your in-house resources and what do you outsource. And that's always a challenge. It depends on funding and resources that are available. But how do you make those decisions about what to keep and what to outsource?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the things, and this is Jerry's philosophy, is I would rather have my resources working on something that's more mission focused, where possible. I'm not necessarily interested in doing infrastructure for the sake of doing infrastructure. Like if I have a tool, I didn't get that solution or that tool to manage it. I got it because of what it does, that enhances my mission. So, if I can get out of the infrastructure business in some form or fashion and do things as a service, like, sometimes there's some of these solutions that we may have on-prem, but now they have cloud as a service solution where they're managing the back end infrastructure and I'm getting the benefit of the front end output, the thing that I wanted to get from it. So I'm definitely considering those things because I don't want to manage infrastructure just to manage infrastructure. I want the reason why I get those, the requirements that these solutions meet. So definitely taking those into considerations. But sometimes, yeah, being non-for-profit, of course, being, in the budget cycle that we have, you got to make those kind of accommodations. It's like, what's the return on investment? Is this worth the investment? What's the impact if I don't do it? What's the justification for doing it? So always playing that, always doing that kind of business case assessment for everything that we look at. Sometimes it's like, well, I have this investment over here, I could do it. It's not necessarily the best of breed, but it could accomplish it, because I can't afford that shiny object thing over there. But until I can, I'll try to make do with this. Sometimes we got to make those accommodations sometimes, but that's just the reality of the world we work in. One of the things is, I would also say about this is, I have the functional capabilities model, and, you got for 50 different functions or whatever. I could go out and buy best of breed for each one of those functions. Like I could go buy the best data loss prevention thing off the shelf. I could go buy the best, authentication solution off the shelf. But if I do that and they're all best of breed and they're all the best of what they do for each of those functions, do you think, first, I probably couldn't afford that, but just the complexity in the sustainment is probably unrealistic. I won't be able to, I need to be able to sustain it. I need to be able to manage it, and I need to be able to afford it. So I got to take those things into consideration. If I make this overly complex, it's probably going to be pretty hard to sustain. So those types of things are the things that we have to think about going forward, because I need to have my staff be able to manage this effectively. And, if not, people, my user base will not like, the things that we're doing with zero trust, because it's going to become unreliable, unmanageable, and it's going to impact operations of the mission and things like that, which we don't want to happen. And then I don't want my zero trust to be a failure. So I want it to be a success, which of course, why earlier I said I need to make the users part of my team, understand their needs and how they want to work, and then take those things into consideration. So long answer to a short question, Ann.
No, I'm sure that the challenge of not knowing what your budget is going to be, or the funds that you have until halfway through the year, does complicate things. It's one of the realities.
It can, yes.
But it does complicate things.
Yep.
Providing the appropriate protection for data at scale can be a pretty large effort, and you alluded to that. How have agencies already made progress in that area when they began moving to the cloud? Do you want to talk a little bit about the cloud and modernization and how all this fits together?
Yeah, so I talk to people about this sometimes. I always remind people, and a lot of them already know, and it's probably preaching to the choir, but I still tell people when I talk about this, it's like, there's the commercial on TV where they're all singing on the bus and he says, it's your money, do what you want with it, right? Well, I remind people, when you put your data in the cloud, it's your data, you're responsible for it. You do what you want with it, it's your data. So yes, this wonderful cloud may be FedRAMP. It has all these controls, but let's say it's a SaaS. And with a SaaS, the vendor is responsible for 90% of they're FedRAMP, and they're responsible for 90% of the security controls. However, you still have a responsibility for 10%, and you need to do that 10% correctly. Because if you don't do that 10% correctly, which are things like conditional access policies, then the rest of the controls that they may have may be negligent because you did not properly do your part of that configuration. But it's your data, you still need to be able to monitor it. Now, the great thing about the cloud is they have solutions, they have the ability that you can leverage as part of your zero trust solution to help manage and monitor that environment and that data. But at the end of the day, remember, it's still your data. It's not like, hey, I'm putting it over here in this vendor's cloud, they got it, it's all protected. Why? Because it's FedRAMP. That's don't take that approach. You want to be responsible. You want to know how to leverage their tools and their data to be able to properly monitor it. When you talk about data at scale, yes, that's very hard. For zero trust, one of the main things we want to do is understand where the data is. Make sure that it's properly categorized. Sometimes data is over categorized, it's under categorized. Really understand that data, understand the flows of that data, what normal looks like, what data are we sharing, what data are we stewards of, where's the authoritative sources of that data, where's the data that Ann needs to do her job, when does she need that data. We want to know what that normal looks like. And all the triggers that are causing that data to move, because data really doesn't is always in motion, just about. It's never at rest. Pretty much. We talk about data at rest, we talk about data in motion, but we want to make sure we know where all the hooks are, because if we we need to know that because how we need to be able to protect it. How is it being accessed? Is it publicly accessible? Is it not? Is it my sharing data with another agency or a private industry partner or things like that? So we really want to understand those things. When we go to the cloud, like I said, there's some great tools, take advantage of them, understand them, understand how you can build them into your infrastructure and your architecture, and definitely take advantage of them. But remember, it's your data and you're responsible for configuration. As in IaaS and PaaS, you're usually responsible for a little more configuration, but even in a SaaS, even that 10%, for example, make sure that you account for that, doing that 10% properly. Those are things like conditional access policies, things like that. So.
Well, and we are coming up on close to time here, but I wanted to give you a chance for last thoughts, for things that you want to emphasize again to the viewers about what you think is most important and what their takeaway should be from this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. Couple things I think is, make sure you truly understand the principles of zero trust. Revisit those principles as you go along on this journey to make sure you're still aligning with those principles, because it's easy to get down the road and, then it's like, all right, where did I start? Kind of from, why did I doing this? So go back to the principles once in a while, make sure that you're still aligning with the principles. This, a lot of people get focused on the technology aspects, but also focus on the non-technology aspects. Put that playbook together, understand that the policies that are going to be affected by this, that you may have to change or you may have to adopt, understand the methodology that you may have to put in, where your risk tolerances are, where your risk thresholds are, so you can build that methodology so you are able to tell the policy enforcement engine, if it reaches this threshold, take this action. If you reach this threshold, take this action. Definitely leverage AI and ML, because there's going to be a lot of data that you're going to be relying on, because we're using data to protect data and make real-time decisions. So AI and ML, I think, are going to come in very important into this, into baselining and understanding all this unstructured data in almost real time, so we can take action as soon as possible. So there's a lot of aspects, but I like the approach of understand what you can do with what you have, understand where your gaps are, understand where your maturity is, and then look at each of those pillars and take each pillar in phase. Understand the dependencies between the pillars as you're going along, but take them in phases. Don't try to boil the ocean. This is a journey. You're not buying something off the shelf, plugging it in and saying, I'm done. This is a journey, and it's going to take a village. And I like to talk to people about doing a playbook. You get a lot of people are focused on the people on the team on the field, the ones that this is how we're implementing. This is what we need to do. We need these technologies, and they're the players on the field getting it done. But you have your program managers, you got your project managers overseeing, making sure everything's working together. All the teams that are on the field are working together towards the same goal. You have your executive suite, where you have your C-suite folks, making sure the priorities are there, the resources for the team are there, so that they can get this job done as well. And really, at the end of the day, like I said before, why are we here? Why does the team even exist? Is because of the fans, and the fans are your users. Understand what your users' needs are, understand what the data is that they need to get their job done and their mission, so that you can build those in and you can make them happy at the same time. So, talking to them about the benefits, talking to them about getting the things that you need so you can get that, validate their data inventory, the things that how they want to work, so you can accommodate that into your requirements is a big thing that I think really helps with the adoption. So those are some thoughts that I'll leave with you.
Well, thank you. Great takeaways from this conversation. I think that's about all we have time for, but I want to thank you for joining us today and for sharing your insights. It's really been a pleasure to have this conversation.
Thank you, Ann. Always a pleasure talking to you.
To our audience, stay tuned, because up next, we're continuing the conversation with Cisco's cybersecurity field specialist, Tamara Elliott. Thank you again. Welcome back to Zero Trust Deadlines and Decisions about What to Outsource. If you're just joining us, I'm your moderator, Ann Armstrong, Vice President of Strategic Alliances here at GovExec. Joining me today is Cisco's Federal Cybersecurity Specialist, Tamara Elliott, to continue this conversation around Zero Trust. Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you, Ann.
What have you seen as the biggest challenge agencies are facing as they move to Zero Trust?
It's a great question. So we're going to take budget out of this because that is the overarching theme in the federal government. And I'm going to actually say that I think there's a big psychological barrier that's happening right now, because most folks, we're 1 year in just about from the executive order that came out talking about zero trust as this new model. And by now, most folks are at least somewhat familiar with the concept of zero trust, understanding what it means, understanding where the gaps are within their specific agency and how to get there. What I am seeing in my conversations on a day-to-day basis with our federal partners is, as cybersecurity professionals, our brains are designed to focus on the absolute worst case scenario and solve backwards from that. And that's really what zero trust is all about. But when we think about deploying this in a federal space, our minds are going to the most restrictive use case, the most restricted user, and trying to solve for that instead of the 98, 99% of other use cases where we could be making zero trust happen today. And so what we see is people prioritizing perfection over progress instead of progress over perfection, which is really what we want to see happening, right? That's why there's maturity models in all of these zero trust architectures. It's not one and done. It's an iterative process. It is a process and a journey. And so what we're seeing is a lot of analysis paralysis and trying to solve for everything at once instead of making progress or taking baby steps to improve things that could be improved.
That's very good advice. Agencies have traditionally preferred to outsource at least some of their security efforts, partly because of a lack of internal talent and tools, and partly because it's simpler when the responsibility is with one organization or party. In your experience, what's the best way to decide what to outsource?
That's a great question. And it's not just a security focused question, really, that's an IT focused question. So typically the best approach is going to be if there is a task or a process that could be done faster or cheaper or better by someone outside your organization, and then enables the people within your organization to take on more strategic projects. In my mind, that's an automatic candidate for outsourcing. For example, I worked in the past with higher education agencies where 80% of their help desk calls were password resets. And that's a task that doesn't require a huge amount of brain power or talent behind that. And it instead becomes a time suck for those people that really should be spending their time on other things. So that's an example of something that could be outsourced while enabling your people to focus on the more transformative tasks that we know need to happen within IT. We're seeing this now a lot in federal agencies playing out with moving things from on-prem resources up into the cloud. And I think the federal government starting to not just accept, but really embrace cloud as an enabler of that is a great example of, where outsourcing functions or outsourcing infrastructure can enable, internal teams to really focus their time and efforts on things that matter. And so taking this back to security, you want your security people to be focused on, responding to incidents, helping communicate instead of sitting in the background trying to cobble pieces of information together that someone else could have automated for you, or you could have outsourced, instead of trying to build code, maybe it's a buy versus build scenario. You want your people focused on making meaningful impacts on security and not doing things that someone else probably could have done for you. And my advice to any agency who's weighing these decisions is do a proof of concept with a partner or a vendor. Give yourself a set time. If you can't get it done in that time, move on. But if you give yourself and say, okay, if I can, have this task done within a week or X number of hours, and then it's off my plate, that's a great barometer for whether something could or should be outsourced versus handled internally.
I think that's good advice to sort of focus on the mission and let the other experts handle some of the zero trust challenges.
Exactly.
Let's tug on that line a little bit longer. What I think you, from a vendor's point of view, you often see what is working and what is not working in agencies better than the agencies do, because they don't always have a great visibility into what other agencies are doing. What are some of the lessons that you've learned on the zero trust journey that you could share?
Well, I'll circle back to what I said at the beginning: progress over perfection, always. Don't let the fear of the really complicated or really challenging 5% of use cases completely distract you from improving 95% of your security initiative. Make sure that you're balancing those two things and you're not ignoring something that could be accomplished very quickly because you're focused on solving for this very difficult but very small portion, if that makes sense. I think
Okay.
that's the biggest lesson learned. Also being able to understand that, this concept of zero trust it's fairly new in the federal setting. It is definitely not new from a security perspective. And, if you look at other industries, folks in the corporate world, medical, financial industries, they've been doing this for a very long time. And so there can be a lot of lessons learned, not just from peers in the government, but also from general industry. And it always helps to look outside and then bring those lessons back and tailor it to, the federal guidelines that we know we need to work with.
Okay. That's a good, very good point. Zero trust is built around a system of pillars. CISA has 5 pillars. Cisco mentions 3. I assume it's just a difference in naming buckets or categories. But can you talk about how Cisco addresses the CISA pillars?
Absolutely. So I'm going to echo back to what Gerald said earlier, which is, the goal of all of this is about protecting data. At the end of the day, when we think about security, what we're trying to secure and what is valuable to people that are trying to get past our security efforts is the data. So while CISA has data pulled out as its own pillar, we just see data as all encompassing over everything. That's ultimately what we're trying to protect. And when we think again about zero trust, it's not necessarily a thing, it is a methodology where we're always verifying. We don't assume that just because we verified something somewhere once, that's going to carry over into the next iteration. And so with Cisco, we think about zero trust being applied in 3 ways. We think about people accessing things. We think about people and machines accessing networks, and we think about machines accessing machines. And so the zero trust gets applied in those three ways: people accessing things, in people accessing networks, and machines talking to machines, or application layer stuff. And so when we think about how that compares to the 5 pillars of CISA, really what we're doing is our people accessing things, our users, is where identity and device combines, because you have people operating devices and you have people with their identities. So we're smushing that into one, and that goes in line too with the NIST 800-207 definition of zero trust, where you're verifying the user and you're verifying device at every point of authentication. So that's taking care of the people. And then we align right along with, again, the network, and then the application layer, which is, machines talking to machines, and there's not necessarily a human element associated with it. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, I'm happy to go back and explain more.
No, I think that's very clear. We are coming up on time, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to for some closing thoughts on what advice you would give to folks in agencies who are facing deadlines. They have very strict deadlines and not necessarily a lot of resources. What kind of advice would you give them as they're approaching their time to make sure that they know what they're going to do?
When time and resources are limited, we are always focused on where do we get the most bang for our buck, and that's not just fiscal bucks, that's also, time and attention. And so when we think about where the vast majority of compromises are still coming from, it's still coming from that users accessing things pillar. That's the most common entry point, even if it gets more advanced from there. When we think about some of the most complex breaches that have occurred in the past, 6 months, 12 months, it's all come from something really frustratingly simple, like an unprotected password, username and password that didn't have 2-factor on it, or a piece of malware that got into a device that was super out of date. So if you're not sure where to start, we always recommend starting with what can be implemented pretty easily and protect, a pretty broad range of impacts. And that's, again, aligning with the OMB memo. You want to have strong MFA, and you want to have it everywhere, where strong MFA also incorporates an element of checking a device and making sure it's up to date. Again, really frustratingly simple, but if you have a machine logging into one of your resources and it's running an end-of-life operating system, there's a pretty good guess that it might not be the best or the healthiest. And those are things that thankfully we have ways now, within the industry of solving for that. It's just a matter of putting it into place and communicating it and getting comfortable with the concept that instead of doing everything at the network level, now that things are in the cloud, and we're moving around within our networks, we're going to be doing this a lot more. It's not just you're getting into a really secure network and you're good from there. We're going to be asking for these checks, almost every single time.
Okay, that's great advice. Well, thank you very much, Tamara. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Anne. Appreciate you having me.
To our audience, thanks for tuning in as well. Be sure to stay tuned to FCW for more on security and IT modernization, and keep an eye out for a recording of this conversation coming to your inbox soon. For FCW, I'm Ann Armstrong, and we'll see you next time.